coming from that mentality to now, it's still in some generations that concept of don't make Mr. Charlie mad and don't offend Mr. Charlie. But my point,
when you look at history, you only know the history of those your government wrote about. You yourself never wrote the history of anything, even your own. Everything we know about the past someone gave us. So how do we know that anything is true? The one thing I know that is true is this. How do I know that this is true? Because I made it. How do you arrive at truth? Self-creation. When you create yourself, you know yourself.
Welcome to another Hips News broadcast. We're your guide. This is Vessel 1.
Vessel 2.
And we're here to bring you the things that you might not see that's hidden in plain sight.
Coming from that mentality to now, it's still in some generations that concept of don't make Mr. Charlie mad and don't offend Mr. Charlie. But my point, as far as the terminology, the wording, it's their vocabulary, it's their language. So if you're not using it correctly, and not to say they're always using it correctly, but if we're not using their words correctly and we're not labeling things correctly, then we're never going to be able to get our point across to where they can comprehend it. And I don't want to say that you have to be scholarly to have conversations. And, simple terminology, as we just stated. Someone's calling you out your name, and you run with it. As far as the people in America who are not European, they have been given names. They were called Indians, mulattoes, blacks, coloreds, Negroes, and now the popular term is African American.
Right.
But we change every time they call us something different. We just accept it. And we're turning around and using their words, their terminology, to describe who we are. Right? So when I mentioned the Albion part anyway, I never used the word, but then I looked it up. So if the word itself has a meaning and we're using the word to describe something the wrong way, then we're not expressing fully what we're trying to say. And then because of that, someone can take what you said and use it against you simply because you're using the words wrong. So you're correct. It is a game, but because it's their language that we're using, if we're not using it the right way, then that's going to be the conclusion that they want to put on us as far as we're lazy, we're ignorant, we don't even speak the language, our IQs are low.
That might be all.
That's how that comes about.
That might be all true to a certain degree, but then it goes back to, like I said, what makes them right? Who? Far as I mean, if you really want to get down to it, I don't give a damn what they think, what is correctly used or what makes them right. That doesn't, just because they don't think it's used correctly, and they think that, well, what I'm saying is ignorant. That's the same thing as hip hop. If the hip hop language, yo, bitch, that's bad. That's cool. We changed the vocabulary to fit our narrative. That's the way it should be. We go back to what works for us, and that was that was the same thing that happened in the late '60s, early '70s. We call cops pigs. You know what I'm saying? Smell like bacon. You know what I'm saying? A person who talks, who couldn't be trusted was a rat. You know what I'm saying? That don't, just because we said it, that don't mean that they were rats. But if we formed our own definitions, well, again, it goes back. It goes back.
That's how we got ebonics, which I'm not
But
arguing.
they named that. They named that.
Do as far as the language is wrong, but that only works on a large scale if the roles were reversed and we were the dominant society and we were running things. Then we can do what we wanted to do, but we were not the dominant society, so it's kind of hard to. It's not that you can't do it. It's not that it's not being done, but on a scale of how it's going to stick.
Okay, I
That's
understand.
the challenge.
Yeah, okay,
That's the challenge.
yeah.
Because what you're saying is correct. We've always been able to communicate amongst ourselves in our own neighborhoods, not using correct terminology, but we still can get our point across. But we have souls, we have passion to where we can feel more or less through our verbal communications. But we're dealing with dramatic speaking language, fork-tongued people who they're very technical in their actions and in their terminology. There's no real feeling, there's no real substance in their way of operating. So if it's not grammatically correct, which is something that even if you would go back, and they will always have to point out in our community that the most profound writers you're always going to get in the top 5 is going to be Frederick Douglass, right? Frederick Douglass, he taught himself how to read. And he did it so well that they have to respect him because he breaks down their language to the point where it's a double-edged sword. And they can't run away from how he interprets their actions and what they've done to us as a people because it's technically correct terminology-wise. So that's why they always have to throw him as a great Negro. You see what I'm saying?
But that's what I'm saying.
Another one would be W.E. Du Bois, right?
W.E. Bois,
they
right?
always say he was a great writer and he stands above the average Negro because of his communication skills. They said the same thing more or less about Obama because of his communication skills. When I was going through the school system, I didn't understand it so much at the time, but they would always say, "You're not like one of them. You've heard it. You speak well.
Yeah, I heard that
you
too.
You don't sound like one of them. Your vocabulary is not like the rest of them.
Yeah, I heard that a couple of times
because of the way you communicate.
Right.
It's not that I'm smarter than the average Joe. It's that I've been able to use their language around them to where they really can't argue with me because I'm technically just as savvy as they are when it comes to their language. And as soon as you're not as technical with their language around them, then that's when they're going to try to downsize you and put you in the category of, okay, well, you're just an ignorant black person. So I'm not saying you have to be technically right all the time, depending on who you're talking to. But it kind of it, if I'm calling you out of your name and using the wrong name to describe you, and you can challenge me and get away with winning the argument because of what you said is more technically correct than what I said, then I have to give you that respect in that debate because I called you out of your name the wrong name. You see what I'm saying?
Mm.
But if it's on the street level, then you might not necessarily win because what I called you might fit you to the point where it's going to stick, no matter if it's technically right or not. Make sense?
Totally. I understand where you're coming from. I understand. Totally.
So on bigger platforms, that's like when you see these media platforms where you have so-called PhD educated non-European talking to a European. If this person breaks character and talks any way, shape, or form outside of the college level educational speak, then it's automatically he's from the ghetto, right? Because you're not performing in their view of how the language should be technically spoken. But you're correct. We shouldn't care about
Not at all.
what they think. But they're the dominant society. So unless it's all us amongst each other, then we're not going to be able to win that argument.
Well,
and that's when they can say, because of what he said makes him equivalent to the KKK, and they can get away with it because nobody from our side is going to question, okay, well, who is the KKK? They won't show that conversation on TV.
Of course not. Let me interject really quick. Everything you said is on point, but again, we're submitting to them. Why do we have to worry about their platforms? We don't need to. They won't exist if anybody who's strong-willed and really is trying to defer from their way or what they're saying is correct. If the guy's saying that just Negro or black African American is speaking like the KKK, they can say that and get away with it because, like you said, a person like us will be up for the challenge and ask them, well, what is a KKK? And the reason why it won't be stated is because they won't have a person like you and I on their platform, because they know that we're strong-willed and that we're up for the challenge and we're only gonna do what is correct or what is right. So that's the other thing that you have to mention. Again, a lot of brown skin, dark skin, copper tone people fall for the okie doke of, okay, we gotta play their game. We gotta speak their language. We have to be sound educated and use their for what reason? Because the bottom line, when you go home, regardless if you speak well or you're educated, they still feel that they're dominant and that they over you and they control you. If you start saying to hell with them, they don't exist, and start creating your own plateau, your own businesses, your own functions, your own ideas, and God forbid, if we able to stick together and stick to that, then we have more power and say so. Go to school, become well spoken, educated, and play the game. I'm tired of playing games. Games are for kids.
I agree, but you 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 answered the question. There's no other platform that has been created that is stable that we can jump on where they don't exist. We're using their platforms, and as you just said, we've all been ran their schools. So the brainwashing is massive. We have been taught by them, which is the biggest problem that is now coming to light. We in America, we're the only society that doesn't school their own children outside of the public schooling system. Every community does it. They have outside of the school system classes and workshops for their kids. We don't. So I believe Malcolm said it, when you are sending your children to be educated by your enemy, what do you expect for your children to become once they finish school? It's like, I don't know. There's a book called Addicted to White. It lists some, I think it's 5 values, white values, that a lot of people tend to develop. And it is because of how the system of America is set up. It's set up, if you look at the discussions now, the topic everybody's talking about is critical race. And you have all of these people claiming that it's, like you said, reverse racism, and they don't want the kids to be taught that white kids are inherently evil, and they come from generations of oppressors, and non-white kids or non-European kids are victims, and they have no choice in the matter of oppressed. They don't want the kids to be taught. Okay, fine, I understand. But what have we been taught as a society in general? What is the education as far as American history? What have we been taught? We've been taught the total opposite of that. We've been taught that Europeans are more or less gods. They are the creators of everything, and everybody else are just lucky to be amongst them. That has been the educational training as far as the history, American history, has been taught to us. If you go into history books, you have 1 or 2 chapters maybe on Black history, and the rest of the chapters, I would say 13 or 14 chapters, is all about European history in America. So it's not a fair argument, but they are the dominant society. So of course their wants and wishes will be heard.
Samuel Cartwright was a credentialed man of science who commanded the respect of the country. 50 years after the Civil War, one of this nation's leading medical dictionaries continued to maintain an entry for drapetomania. So in retrospect, of course, we would call Samuel Cartwright a bigot, which he undoubtedly was. But he was also more than that. Cartwright was a practitioner of something called scientific racism. Scientific racism is deeper than simple prejudice. It is the use of science to justify the dominance of one group over another group. Scientific racism has a history as long as science, simply because the impulse to dominate is inherent to human nature. The point is, scientific racism never actually went away. It's still with us. No one talks about drapetomania anymore. Instead, our medical professionals and law professors and military leaders and politicians and cable news hosts have identified a new disorder they claim explains everything bad. It's called whiteness. That were it not for the indelible stain of whiteness, America could be a utopia. Only whiteness stands in the way. Abolish the white race. Only then can we be happy. Lots of people seem to believe this. They're not all bad people, just as not everyone who believed in Samuel Cartwright in the 1850s was evil. Some people are just gullible. And when they talk about this new iteration of scientific racism, when they talk about whiteness, they sound very much like old-fashioned bigots. Take this guy, for example. His name is Eric Michael Dyson. He's a tenured professor at some stupid college or other. He lives in a rich, almost exclusively white neighborhood. He goes on television a lot. Watch him as he talks about race and ask yourself honestly if he sounds any different at all from, say, Bull Connor or David Duke. He doesn't. Only the colors have changed. Here he is.
And we have stood by to see mediocre, mealy-mouthed, snowflake white men who are incapable of taking critique, who are willing to dole out infamous repudiations of the humanity of the other, and yet they call us snowflakes, and they are the biggest flakes of snow to hit the earth. They are incapable of criticism. They are incapable of tolerating difference. They're scared of, oh my God, critical race theory is going to kill your mother. And they don't even know. They're not critical. They have no race, and they don't understand theory.
White men, they're the problem. You hear that so often that you don't pause to consider what a change this is. It used to be only a few years ago that the one thing you couldn't do in America was attack people in public on the basis of their race. I don't like that group because of their skin color. Let's hurt them. You couldn't say that. It was the one unacceptable thing, and for very good reason. You cannot maintain a multiracial democracy unless people of every color have exactly the same rights and responsibilities under the law and are considered of precisely the same moral value under God. You have to have that. That's the most basic prerequisite for a multiracial democracy.
You always said that in the issue for the 20th century would be race. Now that we're into the 21st century, do you think it's...
Of course. Race is, nothing's changed but the weather. It used to be overt, now it's covert. And Obama being in office, it makes it overt again. These white people can't help themselves. You see the things that are coming out of their mouths. They're saying stuff that's, white people are saying wild stuff. You listen to these white boys on these talk shows and these radio shows, they say whatever they feel. I mean, that one Dan Rather with his old tired butt, he's gonna say Obama can't sell watermelons? And Clinton's gonna say he would be bringing us his coffee? I mean, come on, white boy. It's too much for me. That's why I say what I feel. White folks got their freedom. I'm gonna be free, white, and 21 too. That's an old Southern expression. Free, white, and 21. That's what I wanna be.
Half the people use the message, the comments, to talk about how racist you are.
That I'm racist? Well, that's very funny. I can't be racist by definition. Look that up in the white folks dictionary. How can I be racist? I've never told anyone where to live. I've never told anyone what kind of jobs to have. I've never kept anyone from going to a school, out of a restaurant, or drinking from a fountain. I've never lynched anybody. So how can I be racist? How can I be racist? By definition, I can't be racist.
Well, I think what's happening is...
How can the slave be the master? That doesn't even make sense. I mean, that's someone that's telling you this or making that statement, whether they're black or white, they have to be totally insane.
Everyone as though he was your brother. And is there anyone in this United States that we do not treat as our brothers?
Yes.
Who?
The
Black people. Who else?
Indians.
Absolutely the Indians. Many places in the United States. How are black people treated? How are Indians treated? How are people who are of a different color than we are treated?
They don't get anything in this world.
Why is that?
Because they're different colors.
Merriam-Webster is updating its definition of racism after it was pointed out that theirs was overly simplified. 22-year-old Kennedy Mitchum of Missouri asked Merriam-Webster to make the change, telling KMOV-TV people would argue with her over the definition. Merriam-Webster's lead definition of racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. Mitchum insisted the dictionary include the fact that racism involves systemic oppression and not just a personal dislike. She went back and forth with them, and Merriam-Webster soon agreed. One email she received said, quote, "While our focus will always be on faithfully reflecting the real-world usage of a word, not on promoting any particular viewpoint, we have concluded that omitting any mention of the systemic aspects of racism promotes a certain viewpoint in itself." The dictionary's editor, Alex Chamber, thanked her for her persistence in writing to them and apologized for not addressing the issue sooner.
Well, that's all the time we have for this episode. We'll see you here next week, every Wednesday. And don't forget subscribe, comment, or leave an email. And take care, stay safe, and signing out from Vessel 1.
Vessel 2 sends peace and blessings to all those who tuned in. Make sure that you stay safe, take care of each other, and always be the best person you can be. Peace.